on this computer. And here we go. This is Bob Dennis and
Mark Tommerdahl.
Mark Tommerdahl, the Grumpy Scientists.
And we're recording remotely.
That's because
I'm over 60 and I'm told not to travel.
He was told not to travel because he's over 60 and I'm under 60, but you know, I've got my issues. And this is, I guess, our special coronavirus, you know, panic day one.
Yeah, this is our grumpy pandemic science. So
fully a month after the rest of the world realizes how serious this problem is, the United States swings into action.
Yeah, that's right.
What is that famous Churchill quote? You know, the U.S. can be relied upon to do the right thing when all other options have been exhausted. So now we are, here waiting for
the process of exhausting all our options.
Yeah, exhausting all of our options. So, yeah, I was really surprised that a month after the Chinese had decided that it was a serious problem, I walked into the grocery store to buy some toothpaste or something, and all of a sudden there's all these empty aisles. But now it's not so bad.
It's interesting. Where you live, Bob sent me you sent me a picture of all those empty aisles, and so I countered with a picture where I live. I live in a very rural section of North Carolina. Walked into the small store, into the local Dollar General. I'm not advertising for Dollar General, but it's where I live. It's the only store within a dozen miles. And walked in, and all the shelves were full. It was like nothing had ever happened.
People, there's, you know, you get outside of a city. It's the sense I have is that if you get outside of a populated area in the United States, there's still no sense that this is a real thing. But
yeah.
You know, it's just it is what it is. It's a highly virulent thing, and there's discussions about the possibility of two different strains, one very mild and one very aggressive. I don't know, but it seems like there might be. Some countries are taking it really hard. Others are getting very mild, like the United States right now, according to the news reports, seems to be getting very mild effects.
Right.
And you know,
well, 22 deaths out of 500 cases. What percentage is that?
Oh, that's way under 1%. So, you know, that's like less than 0.5%, really, right? I mean, five deaths would be 1%. So you're talking about less than 0.5%. Whereas on average, around the world, it's around, what do they say, about 2, 1? Numbers vary, 1 or 2.
Well, World Health Organization's at 3.4.
Yeah, depending on what bracket you're looking at, and depending upon whether you're factoring in some correction for unreported mild cases, because the most mild cases are going to go not reported, and those are people who did get it but didn't die, right? So, you know, there's all kinds of ways to correct for it. I keep hearing numbers everywhere in between 1% and 3.5% mortality.
Yeah, I was just doing 22 deaths out of 500 cases. To me, that's 20 divided by 5. That's 4 out of 100. Wouldn't that be 4%?
Be about 22. Yeah, would be about 4%. So you know, and it's much more among the elderly. So
well, which I count myself in that group now. I haven't got my AARP card yet, but
you haven't. You don't shop at the local grocery store on Thursdays and get your 5% off. So.
No, but I've been. You know, here I am having to adapt to a hermit lifestyle. How's that hard?
Oh, having to adapt to a hermit lifestyle. That's like the Pope having to adapt to living as a Catholic. Yeah, exactly. This is Mark is swinging into his natural sort of self right now, staying away from other people and being grumpy about it.
Yeah, I'm ready for a 3-month quarantine now. You know,
there you go. So the tragedy is that, yeah, there's a big human tragedy going on here, and that a lot of bad things are happening with the market, and other things are going on, and it's kind of an overall negative. And what Mark and I had planned on talking about actually was a very positive thing, which is the launch of the full launch of FluxHealth, which is our collaborative effort to promote the technologies that Mark and I have been working on for 15 or 20 years, independently and together. And so what I thought we would do is because Mark and I generally have unscripted discussions on things, is talk about why we're doing this with Flux Health. And let me just give you a sort of a background. About a year ago, we set up a new organization, Mark and I did, called Flux Health. I'll give you a link to it down below there. And we put a forum on there, and we just opened it up to people to ask questions, because I get many questions. Most of my emails these days are people asking me questions about PEMF. Mark gets a lot of questions about brain health and monitoring brain function, things like that with a BrainGauge. I get a lot of questions about PEMF. And I found myself answering the same 5 or 6 questions all the time. And doing this on a one-by-one basis, I don't mind. I'm happy to tell people what I think one-on-one. But if I post it on a forum where people ask these questions, that's a good searchable forum where you can search terms and look for discussions. Then whenever somebody wants to know my considered opinion on that matter, they can just go to the forum and look it up. And we have different topics you can go to. You can ask questions, and I try to respond. Mark tries to respond. We all try to respond within. I've responded in as little as 2 minutes, but typically I'll respond within a day or so. And we also, the other huge advantage of our new organization, Flux Health, which we're moving essentially all of our customer service from Micro-Pulse to Flux Health, because it will be better. We have a larger scientific and technical staff. As usual, marketers and non-technical people are not part of our organization. They're not part of anything that we do. They're not part of the cost of our products. It's all technical people who are trying to work these technologies out and advance them and make them better. And so we're trying to bring to bear basically more brains to solving some of these problems, and then giving you direct access to those people. So we don't hire, bloggers to just talk about our stuff.
No, most of these people are like former students who have engineering and science degrees.
I think the majority have PhDs, right?
Correct.
More than half of us have PhDs in some kind of engineering or science. And so it's kind of like more like a think tank. And those things are usually very hard to get direct access to. So basically the way to think of Flux Health is like a big scientific technical think tank about these specific issues related to brain health and PEMF and pain and TBI and things like this, where you can directly ask questions. And some of us are Mark, for example, get asked similar questions by people at a very high level in the Department of Defense and the United States Senate and things like this. And so you're able to ask the same people the same questions, or
we might even get the same answer.
Might even give a better answer. So you can contact us directly, and then this is coupled directly with the technologies that we are developing, that we're testing. And so this is a very unique ability. I mean, if you get in contact with another company, you're likely to get an offshore phone answering person with no real education who has a list of answers, that basically follow the format of, yes, our product will help you. All you have to do is buy one. And we just don't do that. I mean, if people ask us an intelligent question, we try to give an intelligent answer. So that's what you get for free from dealing with Flux Health. What do you think, Mark?
I think that's probably true.
Yeah,
and I'm a little out of the element here. People might not realize we usually make Grumpy Science on like a Friday afternoon with a beer in hand, and this is a Monday morning.
Yeah, I know. I feel like I'm floating in some different alternate space here, but the world is shaking a little bit, and we're trying to be a point of stability. Like, for example, with the coronavirus and with the inability to source materials from China, for example, right now, there are a lot of products you cannot buy anymore right now. And right at this time, it turns out that we had anticipated there might be problems. So we actually kept in stock more than a year's worth of stock. Built it, packaged it. So if you buy stuff from us, it's not like there's any fear that it's been handled or, by sick people other than, than the people we might be sending it to if they're ill. So we don't have any of the same sourcing problems, and we will not for quite a while, because we've built up a big stock of stuff for the Micro-Pulse products. And I don't know, I think you've got a fair stock for BrainGauge.
We're in the same boat for BrainGauge. I'm always paranoid. I think we got BCAs for about 5,000.
Yeah, exactly. So all of our critical components are all stuff we have in stock, and we can do the assembly for you and ship it out same day. So there should be no glitch in our ability to deliver technology that you're interested in if it's something that you want right away. It should be just as it was, before the world started collapsing. But anyway, so that's really what we wanted to tell you, was to invite you to take part in the forum, take part in the community. A lot of people ask questions. Some of them are very
announcements. Sometimes we make announcements on the forum.
Oh yeah.
The general info, and so take a look at it and see if there's anything of interest.
Well, there's not just the forum, and there's a lot of actual information that is very interesting and I think of great value. Like, for example, we have a journal, and it's a real legitimate scientific peer-reviewed journal with contributors from all over the place. The Journal of Science and Medicine, which is another resource that we point to a lot, and it's peer-reviewed. There are independent editors, and it's got the various registrations as a real legitimate journal. You can search things up. You can go there. We're just starting now. We've already put a number of papers and studies on there. We've got a bunch of additional ones in review. So if you're interested in reading about the latest stuff on PEMF or brain functional measurement, you can go straight to our journal. I'll put a link again right below here, right easily for you to find, to the Journal of Science and Medicine.
Right, and then if you have questions about those papers, put them on the forum. That'd be
Absolutely.
Great.
You can ask about these papers. You can ask questions about them. You can bring in more information if you have it.
You can submit papers, and we'll review them. If you want to write your own paper, that's fine.
Well, there's another thing. I mean, if you're very serious about doing research, and you find this stuff interesting, and you have difficulty publishing it in a standard mainstream journal that doesn't want to publish stuff unless it fits their narrow definition or their narrow model. There are things that are real hard, serious science that many scientists just don't want to grapple with because there's a problem with it.
So that sort of reminds me about another topic that we'll probably get more into in the next grumpy video. It's a little grumpier than what we've just been talking about, but it's related to the journal and why have your own journal, or why. But what a lot of people don't realize is what the Good Old Boy Club at NIH does, the Good Old Boy Club in science. And I actually had a conversation with people last week, and in a different area, but there's a mafia kind of conspiracy for keeping new ideas from surfacing. And even when you do surface, there's still, that mafia will still fight you. Even like they'll try to legislate you out. Even, they say, well, that looks like it works, but that's a competitor.
Hey,
and
if you can't,
so the public deserves to have the best science at its fingertips.
The public pays for it.
You want to disseminate information.
That's right.
We'll go into some details about the concussion mafia and in another session. I know Bob's been been on the receiving end of the tissue engineering mafia.
I got an email yesterday from one of our very close colleagues, another grumpy scientist, who said to me yesterday, and Mark and I hadn't even talked about this yet. that he was going to stop doing liver tissue engineering research. He's going to stop because he can't get anything published because of and he called it the liver tissue engineering mafia. There's 3 people who dominate all the publications. The reason they do that, the reason they dominate the publications is because that allows them to dominate the published literature. And so they sit on the editorial boards of a bunch of important journals, and they suppress information from people who are not part of their mafia. And so if you can't get your papers published, then you can't reference those papers when you apply for grants. So this was really in the final analysis, this all comes down to who's getting the grant money. Well, who gets the grant money? Well, it's the person or the group that's published the most science and peer review. Okay.
Right.
And if you suppress your competitors, then it gives the appearance that you're the only game in town, and then you get the funding.
Right.
And this is exactly what Ike Eisenhower predicted in his famous speech, which, you know, I should give a link to, which is he didn't just predict the military industrial complex, he predicted the scientific academic elite, the academic intellectual elite. And what he said was, if we start pumping too much federal money into academia, there's going to be a small group of people who take over science, and everybody else who's an innovator, everybody else who's taking the risk, innovating, thinking differently, they're going to get pushed to the margins. That's exactly what has happened.
Yeah, let's give you an example of what the difference is. So for the last 15 years, people have been studying all kinds of things. I'm just going back over, say, 15 years of concussion research and mild TBI or whatever, people exposed to blast or people that have got hit in the head. And, you know, the first sets of studies were, okay, we're going to do this kind of study. And they do this kind of study. And after 5 years, they'll do study X and with certain methods. And after that 5 years, they say, okay, look, we published this and we studied, say, 100 people over a 5-year period that got hit in the head. And look, there's a 8% difference between people who got hit in the head and people who didn't. And their error bars are overlapping. And so basically, you know, what they're at the level of at that study, and this is again 15 years ago, they said, well, okay, if you were to walk into say a doctor's office and you hit your head and you use that method to test, they would test you, and then they would say, okay, we're going to test another 20 people, and then we'll test about 40 more people, and then we'll tell you which group you're in, whether you had what's wrong with you. Actually, those same studies that were done 15 years ago, they're still going on. And the latest round of proposal announcements, in other words, what people should apply for, are the same. They're proposing the same thing. And that's because lobbyists have put that in there. And it's really, you know, the public would be kind of irritated if they knew that. But here's the difference. Let's say you've got a truly diagnostic capability in your method. That means you can test somebody and you can actually see a big difference.
In one individual, this is the key.
Yeah, N of 1 should be key, not N of 100. Oh, but every 5 years, people come along and say, we just need 5 more years of funding. And all they're trying to do is get to age 65 and retire.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. So Mark is pointing out something that we see all the time in academic science, which is, you know, get your groups, your test groups big enough that you can show statistically significant differences between groups that are so small they're not even clinically significant, but they're statistically significant. Like the famous example is, you know, you take 10,000 people who are overweight and you put them on a diet, and you put half of those 10,000 people on some crazy diet, and 10,000 of them are controls. And so the 5,000 that are on this crazy diet, maybe they lose 1/4 pound in a month, but you've got enough people that you can show it's statistically significant difference. It's not really due to chance. Yep, after a month, you can lose 1/4 pound if you do all these crazy dietary things, but 1/4 pound, who cares? I mean, you know, who cares? It's not statistically, it's not clinically significant, but it's statistically significant. And it's only statistically significant because of the games people play in in research. And then when you're talking about diagnosis, that's a completely different thing. Now for diagnosis, you're talking about, you want each and every individual to be able to be assessed and then diagnosed. And you can't say, well, there's these little tiny differences that if you're looking at thousands and thousands of people and you compare them with other groups of, hundreds or thousands of people, and there's these slight differences, that doesn't matter. And it doesn't have any diagnostic power. You need to be able to take an N of one person, and make a measurement, and then be able to say, okay, they're in this group or they're in that group, and there's a big enough difference that it matters. And the vast majority of research on things like traumatic brain injury don't give you that kind of information. They're playing this statistical game so that they can look at large groups, look for very small differences that don't really matter, and then get more funding for that. And as Mark says, in 5 years, maybe we'll have a diagnostic. But every 4 or 5 years, they say that again. In 5 years, we'll have.
Yeah, and when you're part of this, you start hearing this in different areas, and then you hear, oh my gosh, we just need 5 more years. I've heard that in multiple neurological disorders, and Bob's heard it, and same thing in tissue engineering. And I love your story that you tell your students, who always come tell you about some new thing, and they go, hey, no, we just discovered this new thing, and in the literature. And he said, well, actually that's 20 years old. So that's, and that happens all the time. People have been, and the other thing is, another reason for starting your own journal is because some journals are starting to disallow you to cite papers that are more than 10 years old. So
I was hoping you'd mention that. You would mention that, because you're the expert in this. What has happened, just broadly, and I'll let Mark get into details, is that many academics realize that there's this memory cycle that the tax-paying public has. We only remember things back a short time. So if you actually write a paper and you put in all the correct, seminal, important, original references, people will start to realize, whoa, they discovered that 40 years ago, or they discovered that 60 years ago.
Yeah.
So what a lot of academics are doing now is they're saying, well, you can't publish references more than 10 years old. And this allows them to reset.
They're not up to our standards,
They allow you to reset the memory cycle, to say, no. It's like a magician redirect. No, don't look over here. Look only at this new stuff over here. I want you to look at this. And when you just look at the last 5 or 10 years, what we're doing is brand new.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening. It's starting to happen in a lot of places. Nobody wants to look at what we've been looking at 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, because a lot of it was worked out back then, and it hasn't been improved since. But anyway,
yeah.
So what are your thoughts?
Examples of that was a 2012 paper on the effects of caffeine on reaction time. And as you know, the BrainGauge measures reaction time quite well. And, but, lately, reaction time, we talked about this before, the reaction time that's collected by a lot of these methods is pretty bad. And actually the stuff done prior to 1970 was more accurate. These people in 2012 reported the effects of caffeine on reaction time, and they basically, they didn't cite, they acted like they were the first people to do it. And, there was a 1934 paper that was actually much better. And the guy had, he obviously had to jump through some hoops to do the proper methods, but his methods were actually more accurate. Anyway, I thought that was pretty interesting.
Mark and I have talked about this many times now already on Grumpy Science, which is that sometimes the methods, when they're quite primitive, it forces you to do them very carefully. And a lot of this work was done very, very carefully prior to the existence of the transistor, prior to the availability of computers or the internet, or, in some cases even earlier than that. And sometimes this work was done very, very well. And it is a psychological problem that people have, that they don't want to hear that something's been known for a really long time, and over and over again, it's been proven over and over and over again, but it's not something that people want to hear. And this happens all the time with our dietary advice and our assessments, our clinical assessments, and some of our treatments. Some of these ideas are 100 years old or older,
Yeah,
and
it's
they
enough to make you
work.
grumpy.
And some of them, some really bad ideas. This is the other half of the coin. Some really bad ideas are 100 years old, but if you get everybody to forget about them, and then you rehash them as something new every 5 or 10 years, you can keep reselling the same bad idea. And that's a lot of what's going on, especially in tissue engineering. If you exclude every promise that was made in all the papers that were published prior to 2010, it all seems like it's new, and gee whiz, in the next couple of years, we're going to have new arms and legs and hearts and lungs and livers and stuff. But I force all of my students to look back, find the original papers. And some of them who do that, they say, wow, oh my goodness, this has not gone forward. And in fact, if you look closely enough, Mark sort of alluded to this, some areas of science actually are currently going backwards, because they're doing the same work that was done decades ago, and they're not even doing it as well.
Yeah, it's actually what happened in our field from the time of von Bekeschi, who kind of came up with some ideas about how tactile interactions were going on. And his ideas, even though he got the Nobel Prize, his ideas were sort of put on the back burner and disregarded from the 60s and 70s all the way through until like 2004, when basically we started coming up with our own ideas about, well, basically reinventing the von Bekeschi wheel.
Right. So this is what we're doing. We're saying, look, we're active scientists in this area. We're actively doing research. You can come to look at what we're publishing on the Journal of Science and Medicine. I'll put the link down there. You can come to our forum and you can comment on things. You can point out, I mean, if we're missing something from, I'll tell you what, if we're missing something from 40 or 60 years ago, you point it out and give us a real citation.
Yeah,
we will listen.
Like to see it.
It'll get folded into our base of knowledge, and people will hear about it. There's no suppression of the history here on Grumpy Science. Grumpy Science is all about looking at the history of what we've known for many decades, and we're looking at what we think we know now and putting it into that kind of perspective. Modern academics is all about forget the past, look only right now and fund us for the future. And so we're trying to buck that trend. We can't do it for everything, but we can do it in our areas of expertise. So if you come to the Journal of Science and Medicine, or you go to our forum, you can take part in that. And if you have questions on the papers, you can put forward these questions, and we will give you intelligent answers. If you disagree with them,
that's sort of a tall order for us to give.
We'll try to give you.
We'll do our best to make it.
And the thing is that these things become interactive. If enough people say the same sorts of things, it does change the way that we think about things, and that gets incorporated into the way we conduct science and the way we report it. And so this is essentially, it's a community we're inviting you to be part of. And so far as I know, there's not a lot of academic communities that A, welcome knowledge of the past, and B, welcome the input from the broader community of interested people. With it, so far as I know, there's nothing like that. But we, Mark and I put this sort of thing together and we put it out there. So please come and visit, and we'd love to hear from you.
All right. That's probably more than they want today.
Probably more than they want for one day, but we'll call it a day, and we'll put some links down there and talk to you again soon.